Let me be direct with you from the outset because what arrived at the port of Bandar Abbas in the last 72 hours demands directness. What we are witnessing is not a routine arms transfer. It is not the kind of cosmetic military assistance that gets announced at press conferences in Moscow and Tehran. It is not a defensive system. What we are witnessing is the operational deployment of a weapon platform that has been the subject of classified Pentagon assessments for nearly 5 years and whose arrival in Iranian hands fundamentally rewrites the calculus of every American carrier strike group operating between the Indian Ocean and the Eastern Mediterranean. The implications are not theoretical. They are immediate, they are measurable, and they are being absorbed in real time by naval planners in Norfolk, in Bahrain, and at the Pentagon's Office of Net Assessment. The information now circulating among Western defense analysts in the past 48 hours describes something that does not match prior intelligence baselines. What it describes is not a missile system that Iran already operated. It is not a hypersonic platform Iran had already tested. It is not the well-known KH-31 or KH-35 family that has been moving through the broader region for years. What it describes is the operational handover of a specific Russian-built anti-ship platform paired with an electronic warfare module and a satellite-cued targeting architecture that allows real-time engagement of moving maritime targets at ranges exceeding 1,500 kilometers. In the next 18 minutes, this analysis will walk through exactly what was delivered, why this specific combination of capabilities matters more than any individual weapon Iran has previously fielded, and why the next time an American carrier transits through the Arabian Sea or the Strait of Hormuz, the assumptions that governed its operating posture for the past 3 decades will no longer apply. Subscribe now if this is the first encounter with this channel, because what follows is being actively analyzed by naval intelligence professionals across 3 continents, and it is not speculation. Let us begin with what an American carrier strike group actually is, because the geography of the threat cannot be understood without first understanding what the threat is directed against. An American carrier strike group is not a single ship. It is a layered defensive constellation built around a single Nimitz-class or Ford-class aircraft carrier displacing roughly 100,000 tons and carrying a crew of approximately 5,000 sailors and aviators. Around that carrier orbit, between 4 and 7 escort vessels, typically 2 Ticonderoga-class cruisers and several Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, each equipped with the Aegis combat system that has been the heart of American naval air defense for 40 years. Beneath the surface, 1 or sometimes 2 attack submarines provide undersea protection and offensive strike options. In the air, F-35C and FA-18 Super Hornet aircraft fly defensive combat air patrols at varying distances from the carrier, supplemented by E-2D Hawkeye airborne early warning aircraft providing extended radar coverage. The combined cost of a single American carrier strike group, including its embarked air wing, exceeds $25 billion at construction and consumes operating budgets approaching $3 billion annually. This entire architecture is designed around a specific threat model. That threat model assumes adversaries cannot reliably target a moving carrier at extended ranges with weapons that arrive faster than the Aegis system can react and discriminate. The Russian delivery to Iran has broken that assumption, and the assumption was the foundation on which carrier deployments to contested waters were justified for 30 years, and on which a significant portion of American grand strategy rests. To put this in perspective, the Aegis combat system was designed in the 1980s against a Soviet threat profile dominated by subsonic and early supersonic anti-ship missiles. Successive upgrades extended its capability against later generation threats, including the Chinese DF-21D anti-ship ballistic missile and various supersonic cruise missile platforms. According to publicly available documentation from the Congressional Research Service and confirmed in statements by former senior U.S. Navy officers, the current Aegis Baseline 9 and Baseline 10 configurations are optimized against threats arriving at speeds up to roughly Mach 5 with limited terminal maneuver capability. The platform Russia has now placed in Iranian hands operates outside that envelope on both dimensions. It travels faster, it maneuvers more aggressively in its terminal phase, and it incorporates electronic countermeasures that the Aegis radar suite was not engineered to address. The Standard Missile 6 interceptor, which represents the most advanced engagement capability currently fielded, achieves high probability of kill against the threats it was designed to engage. It was not designed to engage Mach 8 maneuvering hypersonic threats with active counter-detection capabilities. Subscribe if this level of analysis is landing differently than what is being reported on cable networks, because the cable coverage will not approach this material with any technical seriousness for weeks, if at all, and when it does, the analysis will be filtered through political talking points rather than presented as the operational reality that naval professionals already understand. Announcement number 1. The specific platform delivered is the Zircon hypersonic anti-ship cruise missile, designated by Russian sources as the 3M-22 and known in Western intelligence circles as the SSN-33. And this delivery matters more than anything else that has happened in the region this year. The Zircon is not a developmental program. It is not a paper weapon. It has been operationally deployed aboard Russian Admiral Gorshkov-class frigates since 2022, and it has been tested against representative target sets in the Barents Sea and the Mediterranean. According to data published by Russian state defense outlets and corroborated by Western imagery analysts, the Zircon achieves sustained flight speeds between Mach 7 and Mach 9, executes terminal maneuvers at altitudes that complicate radar tracking, and incorporates an active radar seeker hardened against electronic jamming. The reaction window available to an Aegis-equipped destroyer engaging an inbound Zircon is, by conservative estimates, between 5 and 9 seconds. The Standard missile family that constitutes the primary Aegis interception inventory requires significantly longer engagement timelines to achieve high single-shot kill probabilities against maneuvering targets. The mathematics do not favor the defender. Received. That is announcement number 1. Stay with me, because what comes next is where the picture becomes substantially more dangerous for American naval planners, and where the strategic implications begin to ripple outward into questions of grand strategy that the Pentagon has been avoiding for years. The Zircon on its own would already represent a serious capability shift, but the Zircon was not delivered on its own. Announcement number 2. The delivery package included a satellite-cued targeting architecture that allows Iranian launch platforms to receive real-time positional updates on moving naval targets at ranges far beyond what coastal radar could otherwise provide. This is the part Western intelligence services have been quietly confirming over the last 48 hours. The targeting feed is reportedly drawn from a combination of Russian military reconnaissance satellites and Iranian indigenous reconnaissance assets that have been progressively deployed since 2023, including the Kayam satellite series and several smaller imaging platforms launched aboard Russian boosters from Plesetsk and Vostochny. The integration allows a Zircon launched from an Iranian coastal site to receive course corrections during mid-course flight, dramatically improving its terminal engagement probability against a maneuvering carrier strike group. According to a Defense Security Asia report published this week, the integration timeline observed in recent Iranian exercises suggests the capability is already operational, not experimental. Coastal launch sites along the Iranian shoreline of the Strait of Hormuz have reportedly been hardened against counterstrike, with mobile launchers integrated into pre-surveyed firing positions that can be transitioned between in minutes rather than hours, making preemptive suppression of the system extraordinarily difficult, even with persistent surveillance. Received. That is announcement number 2. Bear with me, because the third announcement is the one that almost nobody in the mainstream defense coverage is connecting correctly to the broader strategic picture. Announcement number 3. The delivery package also included an electronic warfare module that degrades the situational awareness of a carrier strike group during the critical detection window. The module is described in the assessments as a coordinated emitter array designed to saturate the high-frequency radar bands used by Aegis-equipped escorts during the moments when an inbound hypersonic threat would normally be detected and engaged. The effect of the module is not to make the strike group blind. The effect is to compress the already narrow Zircon engagement window by an additional 2 to 3 seconds. In the calculus of high-speed missile defense, 2 to 3 seconds is the difference between a successful interception and a successful hit. According to assessments now circulating among Western naval intelligence services, the combined effect of the Zircon, the satellite targeting feed, and the electronic warfare module is to push the single-shot kill probability against an Aegis-defended carrier into a range that no American admiral would have considered tolerable 5 years ago. Received. That is announcement number 3, and the announcements are connected. The weapon, the targeting feed, and the electronic warfare module were not 3 separate Russian decisions executed independently. They were 3 components of a single integrated transfer package that was negotiated, packaged, and delivered as a coherent capability set designed specifically to address the American carrier as the central instrument of American power projection in the region. Now the discussion turns to what is really happening behind the headlines, because there are 2 stories playing out simultaneously, and the international media is only covering the surface story. The first story, the visible story, is the headline that Russia transferred weapons to Iran. That story will get a day of coverage and then disappear into the news cycle. But there is a second story that is not being told, and it is the more consequential one. The second story is about why Moscow chose to deliver this specific package now in this specific configuration, and what that choice reveals about Russian strategic intent in the broader confrontation with Washington. Think carefully about what this represents. For nearly 20 years, the working assumption among Western analysts was that Russia would not transfer its most sensitive anti-ship technology to Iran. The reasoning was that Moscow valued the platform's deterrent value too highly to risk dilution through proliferation, that it feared American or Israeli reverse engineering of the system, and that it saw the relationship with Iran as transactional rather than strategic. Every one of those assumptions has now been falsified by the events of the past 72 hours. The transfer indicates that Moscow no longer regards proliferation risk as outweighing the strategic benefit of placing a serious anti-carrier capability in the hands of an actor positioned to constrain American freedom of maneuver in the Persian Gulf and the Arabian Sea. That is not a tactical adjustment. That is a strategic reorientation of the Russian-Iranian relationship from limited partnership to coordinated alignment, and it is the kind of shift that historians will look back on as a hinge point in the construction of the multipolar order. The timing of the transfer also deserves careful attention. The delivery occurred in a window during which the American administration is preoccupied with multiple simultaneous foreign policy crises, and during which the European powers have been distracted by their own internal political turbulence. The Russian planning cycle is not coincidental. According to assessments now circulating among Western intelligence services, the package had been prepared and pre-positioned for delivery for several months, with the final transfer authorization held in reserve until a window of maximum Western distraction could be identified. That level of strategic patience and operational coordination reflects a Russian decision-making process that is treating the broader confrontation with the West as a long-duration strategic contest rather than as a series of discrete tactical engagements. The implication is that further transfers of capabilities not yet anticipated by Western intelligence should be expected on similar timing logic over the coming 18 months. The American response to the transfer has been notably restrained in the past 48 hours. The Pentagon has issued no specific public statement on the Zircon delivery. The Fifth Fleet has not announced any change to its deployment posture in the Persian Gulf. The administration has not raised the issue at any public press briefing. This silence is itself a signal. It suggests either that Washington was informed of the transfer in advance through intelligence channels and chose not to disrupt the disclosure timeline publicly, or that Washington has independently concluded that public engagement with the issue would draw uncomfortable attention to the gap between American naval doctrine and the actual threat environment in which that doctrine operates. Either interpretation has profound implications for the next phase of American military posture in the region, and neither interpretation suggests that the silence will hold beyond the immediate news cycle. When the silence breaks, the conversation will turn to questions about the credibility of decades of defense procurement decisions, about the rate of return on $1 trillion of carrier-centric naval investment, and about the institutional choices that produced a force optimized against the wrong threat at the wrong moment. If there is a retirement portfolio with any exposure to defense contractors, an interest in the price of oil, or simply a stake in the broader stability of the global economy, what arrived at Bandar Abbas is not a remote story confined to specialist journals. It is a story about the credibility of the American security guarantee that has underwritten global commerce since the end of the Second World War. If American carriers can no longer credibly operate within striking range of contested coastlines, then the entire architecture of forward presence that has shaped global commodity flows, shipping insurance rates, and energy pricing for 70 years requires recalibration. The recalibration will not be announced. It will simply happen quietly in the operational orders that route carriers further from contested waters, in the insurance premiums that reflect the new threat environment, and in the negotiating postures of regional actors who now understand that the older calculus no longer holds. This pattern has repeated throughout history, and every time it repeats, the outcome is the same. Consider the Peloponnesian War. Athens, the dominant naval power of the classical Greek world, built its entire imperial system on the credibility of its fleet. The Athenian navy was understood by every rival power in the Aegean to be functionally invincible in open water. The Spartans, who had spent decades focused on land warfare, could not match Athenian naval capability through conventional shipbuilding. They could not outrow the Athenians. They could not outtrain the Athenian crews. So they did something different. They obtained Persian financial backing, hired skilled shipwrights from across the Aegean, and developed asymmetric tactics designed to neutralize specific Athenian advantages by attacking the supply chains, the rowing crews, and the operational tempo that made the Athenian fleet effective. At the Battle of Aegospotami in 405 BC, the Spartan fleet, financed by Persian gold and equipped with new tactical innovations developed over a generation of patient preparation, destroyed the Athenian fleet in a single engagement that lasted less than a day. The Athenian Empire never recovered. Within months of that single naval defeat, the imperial system that had dominated the Aegean for nearly a century collapsed into permanent strategic irrelevance. The modern parallel is exact. The United States Navy is Athens, supremely confident in its operational superiority and accustomed to operating in waters where no peer adversary can credibly contest it. Russia is Persia, providing the financial, technological, and intelligence backing that allows a different power to challenge naval dominance asymmetrically rather than symmetrically. Iran is Sparta, taking the resources and the technology and applying them through asymmetric methods to a specific geographic choke point where the dominant naval power must operate and cannot easily withdraw. The parallel is exact, the strategic dynamic is exact, and the historical outcome should give every American naval planner serious cause for reflection about the long-term sustainability of a strategic posture that has been treated as permanent for a generation. So, where does this leave the regional security architecture? Let me offer two clear paths because there is no honest middle ground available given what has now been delivered. Path one is American operational adjustment. In this scenario, the United States Navy quietly modifies its carrier deployment patterns to maintain greater standoff distance from contested coastlines, accelerates investment in directed energy defenses, and next-generation interceptors capable of addressing hypersonic threats, and seeks to negotiate de-escalation frameworks that constrain the operational deployment of the Zircon system from Iranian launch sites. The shift is presented publicly as routine doctrinal evolution rather than as strategic retreat. American allies in the region quietly absorb the implications. Regional adversaries quietly update their bargaining positions. The visible posture remains stable while the underlying calculus shifts. Gulf state defense procurement priorities reorient toward independent capabilities that do not assume American carrier presence will be sustained at the levels of the past 3 decades. Insurance markets gradually price in the new threat environment without producing any headline-generating shock. This scenario is the most likely outcome over the next 18 to 24 months. Path 2 is American demonstration of resolve. In this scenario, the United States, unwilling to accept any visible adjustment to its naval posture, deploys a carrier strike group through a contested transit specifically to demonstrate that the older doctrine remains operative and that American power projection has not been meaningfully constrained. The deployment becomes a test of the Zircon system and of the broader Russian-Iranian capability package. The outcome of that test, whether the transit completes uneventfully or whether a kinetic incident occurs, determines the trajectory of American naval doctrine for the next decade and reshapes the calculus of every regional actor watching the outcome. This scenario is less likely than path 1, but not impossible, particularly if domestic political pressures in Washington require a visible demonstration of continued American capability in advance of an electoral cycle, or if a regional crisis forces an emergency carrier deployment that cannot be quietly rerouted. The honest assessment is that the trajectory is closer to path 1 than the public rhetoric will admit. The reasoning is straightforward. No American administration of either party wants to be associated with the loss of a carrier and the casualties that would accompany such a loss. The institutional incentives within the Navy and within the broader defense establishment favor quiet operational adjustment over public confrontation. The risk is that Path 1, by its nature, conveys to every regional actor that the older American posture is no longer being enforced, and that conclusion will generate political consequences across the broader regional order that will be very difficult to manage through traditional diplomacy. Gulf state hedging behavior accelerates. Israeli strategic dependence on American security guarantees comes under domestic political scrutiny. Turkish and Egyptian regional ambitions expand to fill perceived vacuums. The cumulative effect of these adjustments produces a regional order that bears very little resemblance to the architecture that has prevailed since the end of the Cold War. Here are the questions to take away from this analysis. What does it mean for global stability when the central instrument of American power projection becomes operationally constrained in a critical maritime region that handles roughly 30% of global seaborne oil trade? What does it mean for European security when Moscow demonstrates the willingness to transfer its most sensitive military technology to actors positioned to constrain American freedom of action? And what precedent does that establish for future transfers to other partners? What does it mean for Pacific allies who have built their own security postures on the assumption of credible American carrier presence when the assumptions underlying that presence are quietly falsified? And what does it mean for the broader trajectory of the international order when the strategic premises that underwrote that order for 7 decades are being quietly falsified, one capability transfer at a time, in a process that may already be too far advanced to reverse through any combination of diplomacy and additional defense spending? Tell the comments below which path is most plausible given the indicators visible today. Tell the comments which factor, the technical capability of the Zircon system itself, the strategic intent behind the Russian transfer decision, or the institutional response of the American defense establishment over the coming weeks, will prove most consequential over the next 12 months of regional and global developments. The tracking of every development at Bandar Abbas, at Norfolk, and across the entire Russian-Iranian strategic partnership continues here every single day, without exception. Subscribe now without delay. Share this analysis with anyone who needs to understand what just shifted in the global naval balance. Turn on notifications so the next update is not missed by accident, and the next detailed analysis from this channel will follow soon enough as this story continues to develop in the weeks and months ahead.